Hello, my name is Brendan Decora, and I want to welcome you to my podcast, Pro Audio Profiles. Here, I'm going to interview recording engineers, mixers, producers, and others in the pro audio field. Together, we're going to learn how you can make amazing records that can give your listeners goosebumps. Welcome to the show. On today's show, I'm pleased to welcome Brad Cobb. He runs his own studio and also does remote recordings around town at large halls. He has credits with Lynn, Harrell, Harlan, Hodges, Joan, Baez, and the LA Opera, among many more, of course. Enjoy the show. So I want to thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Awesome.
Yeah, really cool to be, well, not on the maiden voyage, but the early part of the maiden voyage. You know?
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I just wanted to start with a little bit of backstory, if you don't mind. You know, how did you get started? What led you to this point?
Well, I grew up in Baton Rouge and started playing bass as a teenager, and played in bands locally there and stuff. And then a buddy of mine, Jim Odom, who started Personas Audio, had a little 8-track studio, and he and I recorded a bunch there. So I really had this love for recording. Moved out to LA, started doing bass sessions. The whole engineering thing for me started way later. And, when I would do sessions, there was a buddy of mine that turned me on to a bunch of work, a guy named Dan Evansall. And I would ask him questions about, why this DI? Why an LA2? Why not a 1176? Why, So I would drill him until he was like, dude, enough, And, I learned by proxy. I've always thought it was really cool, the kind of journeyman, tradesman kind of thing you guys have gone through, which is awesome to pass down the art, But I kind of watched it from afar and, kind of turned bass playing into pro tooling and teching, building rigs, building raids, building large scoring rigs for film scores over the years, and then always engineered on the side, and that became more of a career as time passed by.
Okay.
That's 40 years.
Nice. And you, I noticed you do on the orchestral stuff, you do remote recordings, or how does that work?
Well, so there's a couple halls I'll work at that already have gear, like LA Opera. I worked there a bunch, and I installed a 80-channel Dante rig. So all that's there. Coburn School, UCLA, all that gear's there. But if there's a hall where they say, hey, we need to cut this at this joint, I have RedNet gear, and the RedNet preamps, the MP8Rs.
Right.
So I'll bring those, have 48 channels of those, so 72 with the analog pre's. So you can cut a big section, and it's all, live mix. I can bring these little UF8s if I want, and it's cool. And now I can actually do videos. So it's fun. But there was actually a remote I did on the stage at LA Opera because we needed bars and beats on the stage, and that's kind of not what opera's about. Yeah. So I would take I'd take my second monitor and split it out to 3 gigantic screens out there through extenders,
That's crazy.
So yeah, they're fun gigs, and I love the whole live thing. I've done some at Royce Hall too, where you bring a rig. Actually, at that time, I was renting rigs.
Okay.
Yeah, that was an advanced audio rig, which were great Pro Tools rigs.
Yeah.
But seriously, in the last, the last 10 years, stuff has shrunk so much. It's mind-blowing, And I love those Focusrite pre's. I think they sound great. And,
nice.
You can have them 300 feet away, and there's, no latency, and it's just nuts,
That's crazy.
And actually, because of that...
Go ahead, sorry.
No, just because of that, I changed my studio to Dante because, it was always that, oh shit vibe when somebody would say, hey, can you do a remote over here? It was a day and a half to tear everything down, go do the gig, come back and put it back for 2 days.
Right.
It just wasn't worth it, so the remote, so now it's just augmentable. I can be on a laptop with DVS and do 64 wide if they want to be at low sample rate, or I can bring the whole shebang, it's just
Nice.
It is mind-blowing. It's still magic to me that I can plug in a computer and have a complete 64 wide backup with one cable. It's nuts.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So
crazy.
I'm a Dante goon, but I actually got into it from the guys at Coburn because they were on Ravenna for merging, which is same concept. Just I ended up going the whole card route because I wanted the extreme low latency.
Right, of course.
With Dante,
of course.
yeah.
Of course. And you have your own studio there.
So most of the work I do is in my studio, and because I don't have a console, everything's in the box. All my headphone sends have to be super low latency, and that's where the Dante is great. If you add the PCIe card, then it's like 1 millisecond, 1.1.
Nice,
totally tight, and it allows me to do multiple headphone sends. Like I do 7 discrete headphone sends because in a small space, it seems to be more important than in a larger space to have more, discrete phones. Because where I sit when I play, if somebody else is engineering, I have sight lines to the drummer. That puts my left ear right on the piano. Right. So I don't need any piano. Drummer, will probably want more overheads or, it's great.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's the kind of functionality we never had on consoles.
Right,
at that level.
Exactly.
Which is kind of cool.
Super flexible. That's cool.
Yeah.
And do you produce bands too, or do you just engineer? Is there something?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll have artists that come in, and I'm always de facto engineer, and usually it's producer.
Right.
Times if they want to produce, it's cool. The thing at some level you're going to be producing.
Right. Of course.
How we all know that, and it's kind of funny. This isn't. It's actually more of a question than an indictment, but it's kind of funny, the whole production thing. Like if you go and sit with a band in a room and you go, okay, double that chorus or break down here or do that. That's called production. But if you get all the tracks and you create that later in a mix, that's called mixing. So there is a weird...
Well, sort of.
I mean, but you can produce...
It's still producing. It's still producing a little bit.
No, I think it is.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. I mean, it's totally producing. I mean, if anything, you can, get to your result a lot easier. If you want to do breakdowns or extensions or new parts or whatever. No, I'm being sarcastic. It truly is producing, but I think it's a fine line on what it's called. Like, for instance, in the classical world, whoever picks the takes from the score is the producer, which makes sense because you're musically the guy who's saying, from this section is the best. So that should be as it is, which seems fair.
Absolutely. And I know you work a lot on classical stuff, obviously with the remote recording, but when do you do stuff at your studio as well that like enhances some of the classical, or how does that work?
I do back end production, like I'll do editing and mixes here, Okay. Because mainly at LA Opera, everything we do is live mixing. So there's a 2 mix. It's what's it called? It's a new console, the Avantis, the Allen and Heath Dig console, which has Dante. So I'll have, say, the 48 or 56 multis coming in. I'll have a 2 mix that goes to cameras and the broadcast, whatever that may be, if it's a simulcast on the beach or to radio. And then there's stems where I have like the orchestra, singers, ambience, and then the offstage stuff. So there's like 10 stems. Okay. And you're mixing, but if there's like a radio broadcast later, there's some post, which I'll do at my place.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just like a different kind of release,
Yeah. And how do you, one thing I like to focus on the podcast is, working with artists to get, to inspire them to for their best performances. Is there anything you keep in mind when you're working at your studio to help the artists?
Yeah, actually, well, in general, I think there's a couple rules I live by, and which is, and this is a great comment I heard from the engineer E.T. Thorngren, who I think is really great.
Yeah.
But he was, okay, good.
Yeah.
Maybe you've heard this, but I was tracking bass on a record with him years ago, and we knocked it out live. And he says, "Hey, can you come back Monday? I didn't like this preamp. Can you recut it?" I'm like, "Yeah." So I come back, and it's like a rock thing. It's eighth notes, and I'm playing with my fingers. Like when I tracked it, and he goes, "You play with the pick?" And I go, "Yeah." He goes, I said, "I'll give you one with my fingers, and I'll give you one with the pick, and you can choose." And he goes, "Too many options. Give me one with fingers." And I went, Wow, this is awesome. Now, this is in the mid-'90s, so before Pro Tools.
Yeah.
But I would bet, I haven't worked with him since, but I would bet he still has that same edict,
Right. Yeah,
It's
just make a
really,
choice.
really cool. So for me, less is more. Getting mixes where you got 8 billion options of stuff you'll never either use or want to listen to.
Right.
I mean, people have kind of lost their minds on overcutting for me.
Yeah. Well, there's unlimited tracks
Yeah.
now. I mean, I can run 2,000 tracks in Pro Tools. Like, there's no reason to commit, right?
Dude, it's insane. But why, if you're so creative, why are you pushing the creativity downstream and letting some other guy decide what?
Exactly. Exactly.
It's weird,
It is
and,
weird.
it is, for me, it's like when people were mauling Pro Tools at the beginning for, it sounds so Pro Tool, this record, meaning that it was tight.
Right.
It was never about the guns and the alcohol and the drugs. It was always about people tripping on those substances, or those things. So,
yeah.
I mean, I'm not really crazy about perfect. I like performances. I'm kind of I would be an old school guy, but because I'm a player, I think I just like to cut stuff live. So I know, Harlan, obviously, through us meeting through Jeff, but, like he'll do these scores and we'll knock them out with a live band in one evening. It's really, it's cool. And everything is live. There's no chop, chop, chop. It's just that we hire guys that we love and they don't need to be moved.
Yeah.
I mean, this is where it's at, for me.
I honestly feel like that's part of the art in itself is hiring the guys you love, hiring the guys that are going to be great for the project. It's like so many times I've been on sessions or even gotten mixes from people that needs a ton of work because they didn't get the right guys. It's like, well, you have to start over a little bit.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, and there's, I was thinking about this actually before we hooked up. Is that years ago, I'd done some work with some old school producers. I mean, they would hire the cats, and they had a Rolodex. And if that section didn't work out, they really didn't have the skills to make that work better, but they could just call a new set of guys. And I thought it was kind of interesting. Now we have the skills to make it better, but do you want to,
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
I mean, for me, there's no glory in editing something to death,
Yeah.
It's just, it's not fun for me,
No.
And
for sure.
I have buddies that work at studios, and I hear some of the younger guys only feel like they're worth being there if they look busy doing stuff,
Yeah.
as editors or, and I think it's kind of cool. Like if you're sitting back like this from the console and stuff's happening and it sounds good, you're winning. I mean, there's nothing to do. That's your job.
Yeah.
I mean, if there's beads of sweat coming off of you because you're trying to get around, that's,
Yeah.
And I mean, I use Harlan as an example because he and I have a language now where we work really quickly.
Right.
And we're cranking. I mean, musicians are like, whoa, hold up, So it's cool to be able to work fast when you have to get through parts,
Right. Right.
Because at a point you have so many hours. Place is expensive. Let's roll.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's also, I feel like, the biggest reoccurring theme, obviously, in getting good performances from people is getting out of the way, making sure everything's ready to go so that you can just hit record and everything's ready to go and it's all sounding great and, you just roll,
Bottom line.
So.
Yeah. That's the way it rolls. And so to answer your question, I think the biggest thing that I can offer anybody, and at least in this space or any space I work in, is great headphone mixes.
Yeah.
I mean, once that's done, you're golden.
Right.
And, having good sends and power amps or, actually
Right.
for years I used power amps, but just recently moved to a headphone amp that does just as well or
Right.
better, actually. So,
Nice.
but yeah, I mean, nobody is going to play well if you can't hear.
Yes, absolutely.
It happened to me the other night. A buddy of mine came in and engineered a session. He was producing. I was playing bass with a drummer out in the room, and I didn't set up my headphone mixes correctly, and I was so loud it was just freaky. I got through the tune, but
Yeah.
you readjust, and then it was cool, and then we did a couple more takes,
Right. Right.
But it can be terrible when it's bad.
Yeah. Nice.
Like people say, people should spend the night in their own guest room.
Yes.
It's that kind of thing,
Exactly.
It's like if I'm out there and I have a terrible headphone mix, and it was on me anyway, but you're like, yeah, this could be hideous, I don't even know what I'm doing against this guy because drum sounded this big and my thing was too loud, and I was hearing just the amp and not the DI, and
Right.
So.
Yeah. Exactly. Do you ever work? I know, like when you're producing an artist, do you ever work with them to like find their unique sound or work with, ideas to kind of craft their sound in general, or how do you do that?
Yeah, I think it's more about that sit down where say it's a guy that plays acoustic guitar, and it's about let's just play and record these tunes and talk about them. Maybe just one mic in front of them. For me, that's the real test. To like, let's see your balance between how loud you're playing guitar, how loud you're singing. Are we going to do this live, or are we going to do it to a click? And have you sing the vocal later? All that stuff. But it's really more of a discussion about what are their influences? Do you see this as ambient production way out here? Do you see it as more chunky and center, more punchy?
Right.
It's just those kind of discussions that allow you to get, because by the time you've talked to them and gotten to the studio, they've told you their influences,
Totally. And then, so when you're doing the live stuff, is that like actual like seated audiences, like full performances, or just an empty arena?
Well, it can be. Most are with audiences, and some are recordings in those spaces, so there's no audience.
I see.
I mean, the audience thing is cool, but there's always, you're always RXing to out or whatever,
Right.
And it's always the guy in the surrounds.
Yes. Exactly.
You're like, why does he sound so close? Well, because he's in that chair right below the mic.
right next to the mic. Yeah.
I mean, it's just brutal. Sometimes
Nice.
I've had to like go mute. Where's my reverb?
Yeah. Exactly.
I mean,
exactly.
It's not worth the time to sit and remove everything without mauling the actual ambience.
Of course.
Yeah.
And do you notice any difference in the performances if the artists can feed off the audience versus an empty room?
That's a good question. I've never had the A/B where I've had something that was going to be for an audience without it. And rehearsal is always a little bit more, say, not timid, but not as nailed as the performance. Different energy.
Right.
Interesting thing, actually. So the opera gig is two people. It's a mixer and a score reader. It's like a rally car race kind of thing. And when I first got that gig, I started as a score reader, and I was reading for a guy named Fred Vogler who got me the gig. And I later moved to mixing, and now I have score readers who do that gig. And they'll come in, we'll do a rehearsal, and they'll be like, yeah, that's cool, Then they'll come in, and I've had my mix set up, and they'll come in the next day and go, man, what'd you do? It sounds amazing now. Zilch. Absolutely nothing. Just that they're nailing it harder, That's all,
Yeah.
So, I mean, or, maybe there's the downbeats are better. Because if downbeats are better, sonically, the bottom tightens up, So,
yeah,
it's just a better performance, and that's going to pique people's interest more.
For sure. For sure.
It's interesting how much of, in this world, everything is made to be about audio and about mics and about preamps and about compressors. In the end, it's kind of about performance.
Absolutely.
I love good gear. It's great.
Yeah.
But, if I cut somebody on SM7 or whatever, any other mic, it really wouldn't bother me. Yeah. Sometimes SM7 kind of wins out against some, depending on the singer, some really great mics,
Absolutely.
Or renowned mics.
Absolutely. Now, I honestly hate to admit it, but a good song always trumps a good recording,
Oh my gosh. Completely. Yeah.
So it's crazy.
Every time. And you think back to like all the favorite stuff that we had through the 60s and 70s. I mean, some of the recordings were great, some weren't.
Right.
But tunes and energy and singing, I mean, out of the park,
Absolutely.
Kind of doesn't compare to a okay performance with great sonics.
I just want to take a quick break and tell you about my free guide detailing my techniques for recording huge snare sounds. Check it out now at brandondecora.com/huge snare. And now, back to the show. I know you work mostly out of your space and the remote recording stuff in the halls, but do you, like, if you have to work in like a subpar studio or somewhere where you have to make compromises, what do you look out for?
A couple things, because I do so many remotes. I have little, 14 by 22 cases full of mics, so I'm cool mic-wise. I mean, if I need to bring a pre, I could. It kind of, it's really about the show. It's about the four walls at that point. How does the room sound? And if it isn't really great, why are we there? Because if it's, I don't know what a subpar studio is, but, any space with decent absorption could sound pretty decent, Yeah. But, I'm kind of self-contained that way, so I can always bring what I need. But I would much rather have somebody come here, unless it's like a string date. I can fit 4 or 5 people in my place, but beyond that, if it's a larger ambient space, that's what I would look out for. Too much decay, basically,
Yeah. Do you ever bring stuff to treat the rooms at all?
No.
You like hang stuff on the wall or change it?
I move the mics closer.
Perfect.
No, dude. I mean, you'd need a semi, to bring
true.
all the absorption you'd need.
Right.
I mean, like,
right.
I mean, it is already crazy that I'm bringing mics and pre's and quarters.
Right.
At what point are you offering a studio?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, there was a point where I was doing some work at a studio here in town for a record, and after a while, every time I go there, I'd try to repeat a mic that I had for a vocal, and it would be gone, or something would be not available, and I started bringing my own gear. And after a while, I thought, well, I just need a space. I'm bringing my gear every time, so it's all in my chain. I might as well, so that's how this thing started,
Gotcha.
The place upstairs.
Right.
I mean, it's small but mighty for what it does, We can do a 5-piece band comfortably with ISOs, so that's cool. Yeah.
No, that's great. I respect you for building that and doing that in LA. Like, there's,
awesome.
you just throw a rock and there's just studios everywhere. So the fact that you've done that and made it work and made it awesome is really cool.
Thank you.
For sure.
It is. If you think about it too much, it could freak you out.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Because when you think of the happenstance of something actually working, it's pretty nuts, Because there's some great rooms that are super, super cheap. I mean, with like large format consoles and,
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I remember years ago talking to a buddy of mine, we were thinking like, I think this was probably in 14 or 13. We were saying the studio of the future isn't really a studio. It's a guy who has a lot of skill with some gear. And that's what it's kind of turned into,
It's true.
Because, all our studios were like, one-man bands, so you'd have to be a techie, computer guy, signal guy, audio engineer, probably player on a lot of stuff, I mean.
Yeah. for sure.
have instruments. So you kind of become this, music depot,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Which is a gigantic change from when I came out and I'd walk in with a bass or two and play a session.
Right.
Night and day difference,
Yeah.
A little more investment in gear too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
But it's cool because it allows me to use more of my aptitudes. And I mean, the interesting thing is, like, years ago, tracking records, you would be there for 2-3 days, maybe, tracking records. And you'd be like, you're done. And the producer that dug you, that hired you, was busy for months on that record.
Yeah.
So he's not available to hire you, right? And then, so you were looking for another gig. And then you get the record and go, is that what I played on? Because there would be so much stuff on it. Because you love the tracking date, right?
Right. Yep.
I'm that guy. I love the tracking date. And then I'm like, why did you do that?
No, that's happened to me a bunch too.
I bet.
I mean, I'm not, I don't play on very much stuff, but even engineering, like I'll do an engineering date and then they'll go and do overdubs and mixing and editing and all this stuff. And I hear the final thing that comes out later and it's like, this is totally different and lost all the energy of the moment. And,
well, and to be fair, when we say different, it's usually not great.
Yeah. I mean, the opposite
Like,
is true as well, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
Sometimes they make it better. Sometimes it's great. Yes.
Good. Okay.
But, you never know.
Well, good for that.
It's a crapshoot.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes the over editing and crushing and, sometimes that can be a drag,
Yeah.
But what was interesting, because I've always been more singular in every production I've ever done since the 90s, that when I got this space, I started doing more pickup dates for guys. So it was really interesting to see how the stuff I cut here ended up outside of here, which has been cool.
Right. Right.
So,
nice.
The traction here is a drum kit. It's like a 80s, 70s bottom kit. So people dig that. So it's just interesting to see how people put it in their mixes,
Nice.
Yeah. So
is there any current or recent projects that you can talk about that you want to share?
Right now, what am I doing? Well, if you're in LA, there's an opera we're doing in the spring called Otello. And what is really cool, they're trying to get opera out to younger folks or people that probably wouldn't end up at a opera house, So they do these simulcasts, and it's going out to the pier at Santa Monica, and it's free. So if anybody wants to, I think you have to contact them for parking. But if you want to go and see some opera on a gigantic screen with probably an acoustic sound system, it's pretty cool. And it's a live mix. I mean, as I do the mix, it's live there through a simulcast truck, SAT truck, yeah.
That's cool.
But that's the kind of next thing on my plate. Actually not, I go through cycles in the studio. I've been doing some tech stuff here, adding some new cameras. I added a Rhodes. Fred Vogler loaned me his Rhodes, which has been really cool.
Nice.
I mean, the samples are great.
Awesome.
They're killer. But it's unbelievable, the difference in a track.
Yeah.
Because the real Rhodes has this life, It's a true instrument.
Absolutely. It's not the same. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. It's kind of mind-blowing, actually, how cool it is.
Nice. That's cool.
So, I mean, not to sound like I don't have anything going on. I seem like I'm really busy, but I just can't think of anything. There's no projects, Yeah.
That's cool.
And I just finished a gigantic one that was on at how I ended up at East West, doing strings, horns, woods, vocals. So I ended up in 3 and I ended up in 1, which were both great.
Yeah, I mean, you can't go wrong in that building.
1 is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, do you even have to turn the mics towards the players? No, but I mean, there was a point where when you hear the horns hit in that big room, you're like, this sounds really familiar. And it's a pre-delay from all those records we loved growing up. And I thought, that's really interesting. Like,
Absolutely.
it looks like they did nothing to the sound, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, we're basically hearing input, Like, like when you cut it, don't do anything.
Right. Just push the fader up and you're done.
Yeah. I mean, those are staggeringly beautiful rooms,
Yeah. No, it's awesome.
And, it's like it seems like the better the space, the easier the gig is.
Yes.
I mean,
absolutely.
Because, if you're going to EQ in a small space, it's really just to undo some of the proximity that happens, in a small space.
Right.
So it's not about,
right.
oh, I have to EQ this. It's more about, let me give it some space.
Correcting
you're not going to get in a room, a smaller space,
Mm-hmm.
with absorption,
Absolutely.
Because if you didn't have absorption, it'd sound terrible.
Yeah.
Nice. It'd be too pingy, right?
Right.
But,
awesome.
I mean, I think, as far as insight or, stuff for younger engineers, it just seems like things I do see with engineers are like sometimes what's missed on them from schools is polar patterns of mics. Super important to learn.
Yeah.
Phase of mics. There is no correct way. You got to listen to it. This kind of stuff where, for me, the best engineers are the guys who are really present and not, because it's really easy for your brain to fill in what you think you're hearing. And I'm guilty of it. I've mixed for hours and gone, wow, all that reverb I'm hearing ain't there.
Yeah.
Because the returns are muted,
Yeah.
And so it's really easy to fill in the blanks, right?
I did that on a project just the other day. I was like, man, this
and you got to check yourself. It's freaky.
Yeah.
It is freaky because your brain goes, well, I heard it the first time, so I'm going to fill this in,
Yeah.
And
exactly.
it's a challenge to be present enough to really check phase and really make sure that things, I mean, like when you're in a pit, there's a lot of friendly fire between mics, hopefully friendly. And, sometimes patterns that people think wouldn't work actually work. And that's usually the biggest question from younger engineers. They're like, well, why would you do that? You're picking up everything. You're like, if you throw the basses in Omni. It's not that, I mean, for one, you extend the lower octave, which is awesome. And you may get more bleed, but the bleed you get is more friendly. Because the cardioid bleed is, less cool, right? So, or a lot of, Fig 8 patterns on a lot of instruments are brilliant because the null, and they don't have to be ribbons, I mean, that is mind-blowing.
I'm actually curious. I started doing figure 8 on like a saxophone section or something where people are sitting all next to each other. Do you do that too? Or what is your methods?
Yeah.
Yeah,
for a sax section, nice. I mean, typically if they're ribbons, they're Fig 8 anyway.
Of course.
So,
but if you have some, condensers or something,
do it all the time. And so, maybe if bones are over here and trumpets are here, I'll do Fig 8. If it's like an overall, because a lot of these kind of live classical broadcast mix, I mean, you have an array up front, so you do have this gigantic stereo image. So I don't really feel like I need a secondary stereo image nearby. So I'll do spot miking for, proximity and articulation. But no, the figure of 8 is kind of, once again, like Dante magic to me. It's like, how is it not getting these trumpets? And they're literally 4 feet away,
Right there.
It's awesome.
Yep. Exactly.
For me, it works great on harps, Nice. I mean, either you're going to go Fig 8 for me or like hypercard.
Right.
If you're trying to, but for me, the Fig 8 sounds better, typically.
Yeah. Nice.
A little less consolidated,
Yeah. Nice. Okay.
Yeah, but, I mean, if it's like a film score thing, you're going to want to have, another stereo pair.
Of course.
Closer, depending on how you're going to approach that mix,
For sure.
Not as important on a live broadcast,
Yeah.
There's going to be no back end,
Right. But when you're doing those live broadcasts, those are also recorded for release later too, or is that, how does that work?
No, because most of these institutions are kind of art houses where they're funded by donors, either it be schools, institutions like that, or opera.
Right.
And it's rare that they put out releases because they're just so expensive to do because of AF&M.
I see.
Makes it really cost prohibitive, and singers are really expensive. So it's tough,
Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah, especially, I mean, the recordings will get released later. A like to different radio stations. That will happen.
Okay.
Audio only.
Right.
But to have video is pretty gnarly price-wise. And that's happened.
Yeah.
I've been there 15 years at Opera, and it's happened once.
Wow.
Something that went to PBS.
Huh.
Which is
crazy. Yeah.
It's big money. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's kind of like,
sure.
do you want to put on another opera, or do you want to put out the one you just did, kind of thing, you know?
Right.
That's my guesstimation.
Right.
Why?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Course.
It's way above my pay grade, but I can tell by
Makes
what's
sense.
not happening, you know?
Yeah, of course. So I like to wrap up each one with the same kind of standard questions. The first one is, what is your most influential teacher?
My biggest teacher, like mentor to me.
Yeah,
kind of
like,
thing?
yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
There's been some guys who I love their art, and they've been really cool to me. And okay, Dan Evansall was a gigantic help for me. You know, he left engineering years ago, but he did a lot of gigantic records. There's a guy named David Holman, great engineer. Maybe you've run into him, but sweetheart and just really helpful with a zoomed out view. And I'd add E.T. Thorngren to that as well.
Yeah.
You know,
Nice.
I mean, you know, thing for me about E.T. is just no fuss, no muss, just really bottom line about what's up, which I appreciate because it doesn't need to be an overly polite society in a studio. I mean, we're trying to get stuff done, you know, so I love that about him.
He's definitely a good guy.
Yeah. And there's been tons of guys who have helped me, like, this is how you approach this, or maybe this is how you listen better, you know,
Right.
Doug Botnick or Fred Vogler, you know, people have been influential in my life to have me propel what I'm doing, you know.
Right.
Because it seems like all the little stuff is what really matters, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So next question, which I don't know how much would apply to you since you work mainly at your own place, but the question is, what is your favorite reference track? Like if you're going to a new place, you want to hear what the room sounds like, what songs do you put on?
There's a couple of Grizzly Bear tracks I love from a couple of different records. Pain of Ruins and Vemekatomist. There's a 90s Michelle and Duke cello record that isn't really anything like what I'm doing, but is so sonically gigantic.
Right.
You quickly know where your bottom is.
Yeah.
And I know that record inside and out. Peace Beyond Passion.
Nice.
And there's a record I really love the sound of. There's a German band, these two women. It's a duo called Boy. And there's a record called Mutual Friends.
Okay.
It's just a really beautifully made record, you know?
Nice.
And it's usually in the vein that I am, kind of acoustic, alt kind of music, you know, with drums. And, you know, it's very cool. Actually worth the listen.
Nice.
Beyond it being good music and great performances, it's sonically sweet.
Nice.
I mean, there's a lot of records out there to admire. I mean, like in Spotify, I'll just set up a playlist of stuff that I can run through and for whatever, you know, because in there it's classical music, there's opera, there's jazz, there's, you know, I end up doing a lot of jazz here too because the space kind of lends itself to it.
Okay.
And piano players tend to like the piano I have, so.
Nice. So last question. You've already kind of touched on it a little bit, but what would be one tidbit you have for an upcoming engineer?
If money is a problem and you think you need to have this gear, and this gear to do it, you could not be more far off if you tried. So, I mean, I love my distressors. I love my 160 VUs. I mean, they're awesome, you know?
Yeah.
But if I was starting today, I would go direct in, and the plugins are mind-blowing. You just have to watch your levels, make sure you're not killing it. But obviously, I can manage the level prior to the A to D with these guys, you know? And, you know, everything is, in the drum room, actually, everything's Dante except the kick and snare. So the kick and snare, I like to go through the analog pre's and hit the EL8s. And bass, the same thing. I go through the 160 for the DI and the amp, you know? But, you know, one thing these guys truly need to be aware of is that they're being sold to. And if you dig the gear and you can afford it, cool. But if you think it's keeping you from working, you're out of your mind. Because, because I did get the Dante stuff. Before I bought into it, I did a bunch of band recordings here with only that. Because I was kind of curious what it was like to not use, outdoor compression. And it was kind of mind-blowing how cool it was.
Nice.
And actually, there was a record that was made where half of it was old school and new school. Totally jives, depending on who you ask. One tune sounds better than another, and it goes back and forth.
Right.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah. It's the cooking, not the kitchen.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say the gear that's internal to the rig now is so crazy good.
Yeah.
I mean, I was not a Pro Tools fan at the beginning. I hated it. I had analog machines.
Nobody was. Yeah.
It was hideous. I mean, it just sounded like shards of glass to me, And, now, I mean, I'm like, wow. Actually, I think I was going to credit you for turning me on to Fab Filter. But I think it was, it was either you or a guy who came in with Jeff on a project. He said, hey, I'm going to need this. So I did the demo. And once I did the demo, it was like, wow. So, by the way, that's my favorite EQ.
Yeah, I use it all the time.
You can do
too.
anything. Yeah. The V3, there's nothing else you need,
Yeah.
I mean, not to do an ad placement, but I mean, that thing is so great.
No, for sure. It's quickly become a studio staple, that's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. And it's interesting. One thing I've noticed about this whole, you got to have a distressor or whatever to actually record is a bunch of bogus BS. But being a bass player, same things happen with basses. I mean, you can pick up thanks to CNC machines, you can pick up a $200 bass that will kill anything I could have bought for $500, $600, $800 in the 70s or 80s,
That's crazy.
So it is really interesting how that's kind of gone down in price while, the older basses are super expensive now.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's crazy.
So, I mean, there's the hobby part of it, the owning stuff, and then there's the actual work. All I'm saying is don't let gear stop you. Pro Tools is pretty cheap now. Laptops, everybody has one,
Absolutely.
As far as having skills when you go into a session, I have trained a couple of guys, and the guys who impress me the most are when they ask you a question, you're like, okay, this line shows up at this preamp through this snake, and he's on his phone and he's doing notes. That guy will never ask you that again. That's impressive. Right. Because, there's so much more to learn. You don't have to repeat that every time you're in the middle of a session, which is awesome,
For sure.
So just being alert and being a facilitator, always helpful, and having the biggest skill set you can, if that's engineering or teching or computer stuff or whatever,
Yeah.
Or it could be Zoom stuff nowadays, just being able to lend a hand somewhere,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's really cool.
Thanks so much for listening to the show. As you know, I'm just getting this started, and I'd love your feedback on how I'm doing, if I should keep this going, what your thoughts are. Feel free to visit proaudioprofiles.com and send me a message. Until next time.